What is the biggest cybersecurity mistake you see companies making?
I think companies don't consider attack surface. So when we're talking about cybersecurity, every business has an attack surface, and that's the things you can get to. And quite often they don't consider the size of that and how they can reduce that. And that's probably the number one way to reduce your security risk.
How important is it for companies to have a dedicated cybersecurity team?
I think it's becoming more and more important for companies to have a dedicated team. That's often quite expensive because you've got to have 24/7 cover, and you've got to have a lot of different skills in a security team. You've got people who need to respond to incidents, you've got people who need to configure things securely, and they're very different sorts of people. So you could end up having quite an extensive security team if you try to do it yourself and wanted to do it properly.
So how do employees help their business stay clear of cyber threats?
A good proportion of cybersecurity breaches, in fact, something like 80 to 90% are caused by the end users themselves rather than security vulnerability. So that's people clicking on links, people following instructions, not following processes, policies, procedures properly. So, employees can try their best at following those policies and procedures, and it's a good combination between training and having the right security controls and processes in place.
So are there any tools that a business can use to kind of help their employees and train their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I think email is one of the biggest compromise routes, and there are a lot of tools out there on the market where you can do simulated phishing tests and you can send users phishing emails and you can see how they respond to them, and you can also deliver training off the back of that to users to try and improve your security posture.
So we hear the acronyms all the time, but what actually is a SOC?
Okay, so a SOC is Security Operations Center, and that's basically a team of people that work around the clock to monitor for cybersecurity incidents and remediate them, step in straight away when an incident has been detected, and respond before the attack has managed to manifest itself into something much bigger. So quite often they're looking at users whose accounts might have been compromised, malware that might be running on desktops, websites that users might have visited, things like that are leading indicators that a compromise has happened or is potentially about to happen, and they can then step in to prevent that.
Okay. Does every business need a SOC?
I think every business needs a SOC. It's a matter of whether or not you can afford a SOC. It is a considerable expense because you have to have qualified professionals who work in 24/7 to monitor cybersecurity events, of which there can be quite a lot, and quite a lot of investigation into false positives is required. So in summary, yeah, every business needs one, but there is a decent amount of outlay, and it should be top of an IT budget in any organisation.
So in terms of like the logs, you touch on the logs and where it's pulling, be interested to know what kind of like applications and tools and IT equipment are the logs being generated from?
So there are tons of platforms that generate logs, so whether that's firewalls, whether that's endpoint protection, whether that's Microsoft 365, or other platforms and applications. These are all generating security logs, and when you can combine all those together into a SIEM product, so that's a security incident event management platform, that then allows us to create events, and those events are then investigated by the SOC team.
What role does AI play in modern cybersecurity?
So AI can be used to reduce the manual human intervention that's required. So as we just talked about, a SOC receives millions and millions of data points that are indicating that an attack is underway or might have already happened. They can then correlate all of those events and identify that there is a real attack that's taking place. By using AI, we can look at the key indicators of all of that data and try to automate that process. But it's not foolproof, and it still needs human interaction and intervention, particularly where a compromise has taken place. The human's got to step in and then make sure that they remove access to that user or contain the attack in some other way, shape or form.
So we touched on employees being a big risk to a company's cybersecurity posture. In terms of email, we've touched on a few kind of threats that are out there. Can you expand on them a little bit more?
Yeah, so we tend to use sea life terminology for what's commonly known as phishing, but there are lots of other strands off the back of that. So phishing is a generalized campaign where people are sending emails to try and get people either to respond or to click a link. You've then got spear phishing, which is where that campaign's a bit more targeted. You then have whaling, which is where they're going after a high-profile target, such as a chief exec or someone in finance, someone who's got control of funds, for example. And then you've got the non-email types, such as vishing, which is a form of phishing over the phone, and smishing, which is over text message. So lots and lots of different types of attacks, and they're all trying to coerce users to either give out information or take instructions.
So when we kind of, we talk about the impact of these attacks, what have you seen, and what's the impact that has been on a business using some of these techniques from hackers?
So generally, an attacker wants to get into an organisation so that they can extort some sort of financial gain out of that. So they're looking at how can I get control of funds, or how can I cause disruption. So probably the most typical routes in that are all triggered by an end user doing something they shouldn't. You've got a phishing attack where somebody takes control of a user's mailbox, so they get into their mailbox. They can then intercept a mail trail that's going backwards and forwards. Particularly if that person works in finance or anything like that, they can then replace details in those messages with different bank details, different instructions, and it all looks legitimate because it's conducted using the company's internal email system. So that's one route. The other route that we see quite commonly is ransomware. So ransomware is where somebody downloads a piece of software and it's malicious and it goes after all the company's files and it encrypts them all. They want a ransom for that data. The attackers are now getting smarter, and in addition to that, they're also exfiltrating data, so they're copying data from the ransomware up to their own data sources in the cloud. And if you don't pay the ransom, they then also threaten to release that information to the public, which is another angle that makes it a lot more difficult to recover from.
So both pretty terrifying then in terms of like what the potential is.
Yeah, without a doubt, and also very easy to prevent both of those attack vectors.
So go on then. How does any business owner mitigate against those type of attacks?
So you'd have heard it all over the place, but multi-factor authentication is not infallible, but it's a huge security benefit to prevent people from being phished and their account being taken over. Combine that with some of the technology that Microsoft have, such as conditional access, means that you can then also restrict access on particular devices and from particular locations, which means that it's very hard for an attacker to get in because they would need to have met all of those different factors to get in. So that really prevents people from accessing accounts and being phished. On the ransomware front, the easiest way to prevent somebody from being hit by a ransomware attack is blocking them from being able to download things and run applications. So if you can't download an application and you can't run it, you practically never going to be a victim of a ransomware attack, and it's never 100% guarantee, but it reduces your risk by some 99% by just taking small steps like that.
So if we're looking at kind of like, so there are two ways and two type of attacks that obviously people have to protect themselves against. What's kind of, other kind of areas that a business needs to protect themselves against to further reduce that risk from cybersecurity attacks?
When we first started this, I talked about attack surface, and I think that's another one to revisit, because while attack surface is not necessarily about users and users doing things that they shouldn't do, it's just common sense that the more things that you open up to the internet, the more things that users can get at, the more likely they are to be attacked. So by taking a review of that as a business, you can look at all the different factors, such as services that you've got facing the internet, such as segmentation within your internal network, what things can get to what. And by reducing all of those, you reduce the scope of an attack down massively just by taking that attack surface away, so you can't physically get to the things that you want to attack.
So the quick wins that a business can put in place to mitigate against phishing and ransomware and the likes, are these expensive for a business to look at these today?
No, they're very basic controls, and in the world that we're in now, you could be looking in the region of £5 to £10 a month per user to protect them from the very basic attacks. So that covers things like endpoint protection, your email protection, and application protection, things like that.
So in terms of, I want to dig into some of the attacks that you've personally seen. No business names mentioned here, but what's the biggest impact you've seen to a business with a cybersecurity attack?
I mean, it's colossal. Some of these businesses, I think we personally haven't seen any business that's gone, that's ceased trading, but we've seen many that have been on the brink as a result of a cyber attack, because they literally can't function. And it depends on how long it takes to recover from that cyber attack as to how long they can be until when they can be back up and running again. And I think that's quite difficult, particularly in some scenarios where you've got a manufacturing environment or something like that, where you've got a lot of really old equipment and infrastructure. The costs and time to rebuild that is often not that straightforward. So it very much depends on the client's environment, and also what steps they've taken to mitigate risk. If they've put steps in place to mitigate risk and reduce that impact, so when we talk about attack surface, if they've managed to reduce the spread of that attack, it's probably a lot easier and a lot more quick to recover. So if we talk about the remediation path that you would take when a business has a cyber attack, the first thing you need to do is you need to discover, the very first thing you do is cut off access to everything, cut off access to the internet, all that sort of stuff, so that anybody's got any external foothold in the network, they then have lost that access. But the first thing that you then do is you need to try and work out what happened, how did they get in, what was patient zero, because there's absolutely no point you trying to remediate anything until you found out how it happened in the first place, because you might well find yourself back in the same situation a week later, and you've got this perpetuating cycle. So things that are really important: logging, endpoint protection, information that we get from that. So new endpoint protection products that have got EDR, XDR functionality, they produce a lot of telemetry data, which is really helpful in trying to determine where an attack originated from. So that's what they call patient zero. So once you've got that, you can then look at, okay, how do we lock down that route into the network, that avenue. Then the next step you're looking at is you're looking at what's my impact been. So what do we think they've done? Have they exfiltrated data? Have they potentially sold it to people? So a lot of information gathering. We're not going to destroy anything at this stage because we need that information. Cyber insurers will need that information. Police might need that information, so we don't want to get rid of it. And then once we've determined that, that's when we then get on with rebuilding things. And that can take a very long time, because it depends what we're restoring from, whether we've got disaster recovery in place, whether it's been impacted, lots and lots of different things. And so working with the right partner and having some sort of incident response plan in place for things like that, you can reduce that timeline down in the event that you do have a cyber attack.
So Gordon, I'm interested, what's the longest time, we say it can be, it's obviously dependent, but what's the longest time you've seen for a business to go from attack to back trading again?
I think one of the highest profile ones that we've seen in recent years was the Travelex attack. I think Travelex were out of business for almost 6 months before they got back to even like a reasonable level of normal operations. I think you've seen others that have been attacked, like the likes of FedEx and people like that, who managed to turn things around a bit more quickly in terms of recovery. But a lot of that comes down to how well your data is protected. So particularly when we're talking about ransomware attacks, if that data is not backed up in a way where it can't also be affected by the ransomware attack, it can be very, very hard for a business to get their data back and get back up and running again. And you could understand in a finance business like Travelex, they obviously were fairly reticent to go back into normal operations till they'd really nailed down what the root cause was and reopen things.
So that's massively damaging then, because obviously not only have you not been able to trade for a period of time, reputation, etc., is taken a huge hit.
Yeah, absolutely. And businesses who don't have huge cash reserves and are perhaps borderline making profit, in a scenario like that, it only takes a very small downturn in their business to make them unviable. There was a case recently where a transport company had suffered a ransomware attack, and that business wasn't in great health to start with, and that ultimately finished the business off, and they went into administration. So it does happen.
So all of that's quite a scary place. So obviously, businesses don't have the level of IT intelligence in-house to handle that kind of process, that that level of risk. How does razorblue help in terms of the advice and support it gives businesses to make sense of this world?
So you're absolutely right, Mark. The cost of a SOC service, if you're going to do it in-house, the salaries as a very, very minimum are at least £500,000 a year. That's without tooling and everything else that you need to go with that. So most businesses are choosing to outsource that service because it's just not cost effective to deliver it themselves. So we can deliver that sort of service. We have a dedicated SOC team that work 24/7 and respond to security incidents.
So tell me more about razorblue's security products. What has been released recently that can help businesses cover this risk?
Okay. I think if we talk first about SOC, so we've been discussing that and how that fits into business. It's a bit pointless having a SOC service if you haven't really taken any other security precautions. It's a bit like having an alarm monitoring service but leaving your doors and windows open. It's going to produce lots of false positives, and it's probably not going to be very useful because you're going to be hit with attacks all the time. So we've taken the approach that we don't just sell a SOC service. We have to work with businesses who really want to invest in that cybersecurity landscape. So we have a suite of products and services. We have our Prevent product, which provides vulnerability management and proactive security consultancy, where we're constantly looking at the client security posture and improving it, because it's an ever-moving thing. So it's moving on a month-to-month basis, and we're spending time with them optimizing their security posture to prevent them from being vulnerable to attacks. Then on top of that, you then have the security, the SOC service, and that provides the monitoring and assurance on top of that when you've done the basics.
So the government scheme, Cyber Essentials, it's commonly requested by businesses to obtain and strengthen their security posture. What's your thoughts on that certification, and how can razorblue help businesses obtain that?
So Cyber Essentials is fantastic. It's backed by the NCSC, which is a government cybersecurity organisation. There are 2 levels of certification. There's Cyber Essentials, the standard one, and there's Cyber Essentials Plus, which provides an additional level of assurance. But what the government have done is they've taken really complex cybersecurity frameworks and just simplified it, and sort of produced a lot of key principles by which businesses should adhere, and that massively improves their security posture. So things that we were talking about earlier, like multi-factor authentication, for example, form part of that specification. We have tons of clients that are certified to Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. We are a certifying body for Cyber Essentials. But also clients who are bidding on government contracts will find that they need that certification to bid on those contracts. So that's becoming a much bigger thing, and it's good for the industry because it encourages best practice and people to be adopting best practice.
So how does razorblue's Prevent service from the vulnerability part fit into the Cyber Essentials, certainly the Plus certification? How does the Prevent fit in with the Cyber Essentials Plus?
So one of the requirements of Cyber Essentials Plus is that you have an external penetration test done, and that's where effectively a hacker comes into the network and they run a vulnerability scan, and they look to find vulnerabilities that they could exploit. And so as part of that standard, you have to have no vulnerabilities over a particular scoring level. And one of the big issues that we run into quite regularly with Cyber Essentials Plus is that when that scan takes place, things come out of the woodwork that people were not expecting to see. So our Prevent service provides vulnerability management. We use the same tools for our vulnerability management that the Cyber Essentials certifying bodies use, which means we're picking up the same vulnerabilities that they're seeing, but we're picking them up in advance, remediating them and fixing them before a business has a Cyber Essentials Plus scan. So not only are they going to pass the Cyber Essentials assessment, but also they are in a much stronger position from a security perspective because that vulnerability scanning is taking place on a regular, ongoing basis.
So we've talked about phishing, We've talked about ransomware, we've talked about endpoint protection, endpoint patching. What does razorblue offer clients, kind of, the advice that, it's not all about spending, a huge amount of money, but how can razorblue offer the value to customers and I guess demystify all of these, these scary words, acronyms, etc.?
So we position ourselves as an IT managed services partner. That's at the heart of what we do. We've got a lot of skills and a lot of different teams, but at the very center of that is a relationship manager. So every client gets a relationship manager and a technical architect assigned, and those two work in combination with the client to produce an IT strategy which covers their cyber needs. And we have a multitude of different services that then sit around that recommendation.
So taking everything on board of what you've said today, what should a business leader go and do now? What's Dan's biggest tip to from a cybersecurity point of view to go and put in place today?
So you need a capable partner. So if you haven't got a capable partner, if you've got an IT managed service partner but they're not providing you with security advice right now, you need to go out and find one. So on a strategic perspective, that's 100% what you need to do. From a technical perspective, it is really hard to make recommendations because there's so many different angles of attack. But I would still say, I think in this day and age, multi-factor authentication is probably still the number one thing that you can do that has the biggest impact. I would like to think that most businesses have rolled that out completely now, but I'm pretty sure there are some that have not.
Thank you very much. Hopefully, people find those answers to those questions useful. If you need anything, you know where we are. Give us a shout, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.